Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast, Hidden Alchemy by Sade. And whether you are listening to me over on Spotify or catching me on my YouTube channel, gratitude for you tuning in. I am a holistic and wellness coach focusing on spiritual, mental, and physical well being practices that really help people tap into their personal power and learn how to alchemize their life. So if it's your first time tuning into me, welcome. And if not, welcome back. Feel free to check out more of my work on my website, Hidden Alchemy by Sade, where I offer coaching services. I have my new Introduction to Astrology course uploaded, and you could just find all the rest of my work there. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and dive into today's podcast episode. And this podcast episode, we are talking about the importance of self-validation. And really, in order to continue ascending on your journey and your purpose, you have to accept that your self-validation is the most important thing. And what comes with self-validation is either being liked by others or not being liked by others. And you have to accept both dualities and be completely unbothered by them both. Now, a person like me, I am such a lover of relationships. I'm very Venus ruled. My rising is Taurus. My Venus is in Libra. I'm a 6 life path number. So I'm hugely Venus dominated. And I've always been the type of person that cared so much more about having harmony and balance in my relationships, and sometimes putting my needs last for the sake of having relationships. And as I continue to develop on my spiritual journey, I've had to become very comfortable with the uncomfortable truth of validating myself, which means focusing on my authentic expression, which might not be liked by everyone, but I have to like that expression the most because I am the only person that has to deal with myself on a regular daily basis. And this reminds me of a quote that my father used to say to me. He's an Aries man, of course. Aries rules the South. And he used to always say, like, no one is going to take better care of you than you. No one has your best interest more than you, and no one has to deal with your choices other than you, which I found very ironic for my dad to be the one to say this because, he made a lot of choices that I don't think he was the happiest with, but he did it for the sake of family and for the sake of having to take care of his duties and responsibilities that later in life, he kind of reflected on and was like, damn, I wish I would have put my needs more first. But I think that was where it was coming from, with him reminding me, like, you have to focus on yourself because no one is going to take better care of you than you as you grow and develop in this world. And as I've gotten older and focused on my spiritual practice, I've had to really sit with that knowing of, like, what does it mean to validate myself and learning self so that you can feel confident in the way you express yourself. Because the issue with seeking validation outside of yourself is, number one, believing that you are not innately enough as you are, and you need something outside of yourself to make yourself feel better. And to an extent, yes, we're all here on this planet Earth to enjoy the material things of life. I love enjoying the material things of life, but it's when we start to seek validation from these material things, whether it be objects, whether it be people, whether it be relationships or jobs or whatever it is, that's when we start to take away from the wholeness and the fullness that we have within ourselves. And these things outside of ourselves are like accessories that add to us. But we should not be seeking validation from these things outside of ourselves because everything is constantly changing. People change, life changes, jobs change, situations change. And once you get into the habit of seeking validation outside of yourself with things that are constantly changing, then there's really no internal foundation or stability. And that's one of the things that I've really come to understand is like the human psyche. I love studying the human psyche. I love studying astrology. I love studying occult sciences, which really helps me to dive into the psychology of people and the psychology of myself. And as human beings, we're constantly contradicting ourselves because life is a bunch of duality. And once we learn to accept the duality of life, we tend to take ourselves serious, but tend to also extend ourselves grace because we have to change. So when we are constantly trying to seek approval and validation from people, knowing that the psychology of the mind is always in contradiction a lot of times because we are evolving and changing on our journey, it really doesn't put us in a good place. It actually puts us in a really bad position when we are constantly trying to be seen and approved by others. That is something that should be an accessory, but it should never sway or alter your most authentic self. And the reason why self-validation is important is because it boosts your self-worth. And I'm a firm believer that everything we do stems from self-worth and self-esteem. And your self-esteem literally comes from the worthiness that you see or the lack of worthiness that you see within yourself. Esteem is literally like a power engine that pushes the action, like it's the intention behind your action. And if you have low self-esteem, which is a lack of self-worth, then that is the energy that pushes your actions. When you have high self-esteem and high self-worth, that is the energy that pushes your actions. That is what people see. It's like when you see a person that walks into the room, that person doesn't even need to speak because the confidence or the lack of confidence shows in how they move, because that is what's pushing your actions. So when you seek self-validation, you are boosting your self-worth and your self-esteem, which will push you to have more confidence in the way that you move in the world and the way that you speak about your opinions. If you are a person who doesn't really like to communicate your thoughts, your emotions, your opinions, it's probably because you have low self-esteem or a lack of self-worth, and you fear that if I say something, another person is going to feel some type of way. And that might be the case. And that's very true. People are always feeling some type of way about something. That's our given birthright, is to feel. But a person's feelings should never overpower your worth of feeling worthy to communicate and express yourself, because that too is our birthright. But it can only be done with confidence when you have self-validation for yourself. Another reason why seeking self-validation is important is because it brings you emotional independence. And this is something that we are not taught unless you have parents who are very emotionally mature. We are not taught to have emotional independence. And this is why we can be very reactive as people, especially in the Western culture. I used to live in Asia, and I lived in China specifically. And something that I really noticed about the Chinese is they do not react when it comes to their emotions, to the point where a lot of times people can think these folks are emotionless, which is not the case per se, but that society is just very big on business. Chinese are very big on business. And in order to be big on business, like, you have to detach yourself from your emotions. You have to understand how you feel, but you have to detach yourself from it. And in order to detach yourself from it, you can't take things personal, because you have to understand people move in duality. People move in contradiction. So when you are a person who is emotionally aware, you seek self-validation, you have emotional independence, meaning your mood swings are not moving high and low based off of how another human being feels about you. And that is very important, because if you allow human beings to control and dictate your emotions, you will never get anything done in life, ever, because you will constantly be controlled by other people. And that is something that is very big in the Western culture. We react so quickly to things. What's your political stance? What's your religious stance? What's your gender stance, right? And we allow the opinions of other people to dictate our emotional response. And then when you respond from emotion, anything out of love, and I know this very well because I used to be extremely emotionally codependent, and my spiritual practice has really taught me the importance of like, yo, you have to control your emotions. And to control your emotions doesn't mean not to acknowledge them. No, acknowledge them, but deal with them. Because when we respond with any emotion that is lesser than love, we create a karmic reaction that we might not really want to endure for ourselves, right? Because anything less than love is always going to reap chaos, right? If you're feeling an emotion of sadness and you respond to someone in that sadness, right? People cannot feel your emotion. It's your emotion. People can only understand your words. And logic and emotion are two different things. So it's okay to feel your emotions, but then you have to figure out a way to express yourself in a way that people can understand rather than expressing the emotion in a situation where a person may not know where that emotion is coming from, why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, and they're just confused. And what that does is you end up leaking, you leak, and you allow a person outside of yourself to have more control over you. People love control and power. People love control and power because it makes us feel safe. And the best way to have control and power in life is to control your emotional responses, which means to have a lot of confidence and security on an internal level, foundation and grounding on an internal level, so that you don't take things personal. And the only way to not take things personal is when you're not seeking validation from other people, because you understand people move in duality. People move in contradiction. Another reason why seeking self-validation is important is because it gives you peace. It gives you peace. And I know that this is something that really takes a lot of time to develop to. And even when you develop to it, like, I consider myself a person who has a lot of internal peace, but I've had to go through a lot of hell to get there, right? I've had to go through a lot of shadow work and do a lot of digging, a lot of unlearning, and a lot of new learning to really develop this sense of inner peace that I'm able to cultivate. And just because you have inner peace doesn't mean you're always in a state of peace. No, we live in a world that is constantly changing. So you have to come back. You have to have the tools to come back to that state of peace, right? And especially a person like me, I have a fire moon. So I can either be in that duality of fire and war and conflict, or using that fire to push forward peace and passion and love and devotion, the dualities of everything. But when you have self-validation, there's a level of inner peace because you are accepting of yourself. And when you accept yourself, this is not just accepting yourself for what you think makes you look good. No, this is accepting yourself in its totality, the good, the bad, the ugly, because it just is. We're human beings. We're here to experience life in its duality. So we have to accept our duality. But when you seek self-validation, when you seek validation outside of yourself, you're constantly moving from one side so that that outside thing can only see you in that one light. It's like a way of trying to control people's perception of you. But once you stop caring about how people feel about you, how people view you, with boundaries, of course, right? Like, as a business person, yeah, like, I have to have a lot of responsibility in the way I show up, but not to the sense of where I'm not moving from my truth at all, because I don't want this person to see me in my humanness. And people will really try to make you feel bad for being a human being that's worthy of moving in duality and maybe being a little messy sometimes, but cleaning yourself up after. Once you can accept that truth about yourself, your dualities, your light, your dark, and you have self-validation, there is a level of peace and unbotheredness that you are able to move from. And let me tell you, when you are a person who is unbothered, people do not like that. People do not like people who seek self-validation, who are confident, who can move from their authentic self, who are emotionally independent, and who have an inner peace that is unshakable. People don't like that because they don't have that within themselves. I've had so many times where people will try to do things to get under my skin. And I'm like, I see you because I'm a seer. A seer. So I see you and I see what you're doing, but it's not going to work because I don't care to be validated by you. I care to be validated by myself, and I care to have emotional stability within myself. And the more unbothered I am, because my unbothered is very dismissive. I'm like, I'm either interested or I'm unbothered. And once I'm unbothered, I pay you no mind, no attention, no energy. And that pisses people off. That pisses people off. So it's like when you are on this self-validation journey, you have to accept not being liked. You have to. Because we live in a world that teaches us to seek approval outside of ourselves. So once you show up in the world confident in who you are, especially if you are a person of color, if you are a person of color and you are a woman that shows up in spaces confident with your shoulders pressed down your back, your throat chakra is open, your heart is open, and your feet are grounded, oh, you are a force that people will either love you or despise you. Because we are not even taught as people of color to move in a level of confidence. We are taught to be humble and meek. There is nothing meek about me. I am very self-assured and very self-aware. And so on this self-validation journey, you have to accept that people are either going to like you or not like you, and there is nothing you can do about it, and there is no reason to care. Because again, the psychology of human beings is duality and contradiction. Okay? And once you accept that, you let people be, you wish them well, and you continue being a force on your journey. So that is all I have for today's podcast episode on self-validation, accepting yourself, and doing this in order to continue ascending. This is going to help you ascend spiritually. And you get closer and closer and closer to just love and peace, selfless, unconditional love for yourself, which will help you extend it to others because you're giving it to yourself first. So thank you all for tuning in. I would love to hear about your self-validation journey. How has it been for you? What has been tripping you up? What has been helping you? What are some practices that you do to continue moving in your truth, in your light, and your most authentic expression? I will see you all for our next podcast episode. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, everyone.